This film is regarded as a classic by countless stock traders and financial moguls. It is based on the true story of the Bre-X gold mining scandal from 1993, depicting the tale of a reckless businessman and an unlucky geologist who teamed up in the jungles of Indonesia to search for gold. Within just a few years, they managed to fool the entire Wall Street elite, skyrocketing their company's worthless stock from about 25 cents to $200 per share, ultimately becoming billionaires. Wells is a young man from a mining family. His family has been in the mining business for generations. As his father aged, he gradually handed over the main projects to Wells, who had been preparing to take over for years. 7 years later, Wells's father passed away and the mining industry began to decline. Their stock was worth only 25 cents, becoming a penny stock. The company was on the brink of bankruptcy and desperately needed to find investors to finance it. Without a gold mine, there would be no investors. Without investors, the company couldn't survive. Every day, Wells frantically called investors from the bar, and finally, on his 1000th call, a venture capital firm agreed to meet with him. However, the hard-won meeting only resulted in humiliation and ridicule. Ultimately, Wells had to compromise, presenting his materials to two people who knew nothing about the industry, but all he received in return was rejection. Disheartened, he returned home after drinking heavily at the bar, sinking into a deep sleep in his girlfriend's arms. That night, he had a dream. He saw the peaks of Indonesia, rich in minerals. Upon waking, Wells felt this was a sign from fate. He quickly stole his girlfriend's gold watch and jewelry, selling them for a few $1,000s to head to Indonesia. Upon arriving in Indonesia, his first task was to find Mike. Mike was an experienced geologist who had studied at Oxford and MIT. He proposed the volcanic arc theory, believing that the friction between tectonic plates in the Pacific Ring of Fire creates the high temperatures and pressures necessary to form rich mineral deposits. Once a star in the industry, he was now at a low point, having faced several failed explorations that left people doubting his theories. After a discussion, the two discarded failures in the industry hit it off and prepared to develop a gold mine together. They soon arrived at a mountain peak, where Mike believed there was a significant gold deposit. To Wells's surprise, this was the very place he had seen in his dream. This further solidified his trust in Mike, and he quickly signed a 50-50 partnership agreement with him on a napkin. Wells would be responsible for raising the funds, while Mike would locate the gold. Upon returning home, Wells began spreading the news about the gold mine, attracting a group of small investors and successfully raising $260,000 in startup capital. He purchased drilling equipment and immediately hired locals for logging and mining. They promptly sent samples to the lab for testing to check for gold content. However, things didn't go as smoothly as they had hoped. Test results kept coming back, one after another, with increasingly disappointing results. Soon, their startup capital dwindled, and they couldn't even pay the workers, who began leaving one by one. In the midst of a storm, Wells lay helplessly in the mud, letting the cold rain wash over him. Soon, he contracted malaria, leaving only Mike by his side. Before passing out, he took out the last $2,300 he had and made one final request to Mike: "Please don't let me die with nothing." Mike began visiting every worker and discovered they were facing water issues. So, he used the remaining $2,300 to buy a water filter, solving the workers' drinking problem. As a result, the workers chose to return to work. Weeks passed, and Wells finally woke up. Mike delivered good news. The test results showed that their digging site contained 8 ounces of gold per ton, which meant they had found a gold mine with significant deposits. The two embraced in excitement, cheering and celebrating, as if the mountain of gold was within reach. Wells immediately returned home to share the news with investors. Overnight, everyone was celebrating, and the publisher of Gold Digger magazine sought him out for an interview, which helped spread his story quickly. The next day, a financial mogul reached out to Wells, someone he had previously been unable to meet. When Wells had come to their office, he had been met by two of the mogul's subordinates, and he had taken quite a hit to his pride. Naturally, he wasn't going to let that slide now. He demanded that these two managers be directly responsible for his account and available at all times. Wells moved to a larger premises. Previously, his company's stock had been worth just 25 cents per share, but once news of the gold mine broke, the stock began to soar. Even Brown Thomas and Company in New York reached out to him. This major company wanted to acquire Wells's company, but they were skeptical about the authenticity of the gold mine. They sent a few subordinates to investigate, and Mike personally guided them on a tour. The group panned for gold in the river but found nothing for a long time. Fortunately, Mike picked up a gold nugget from the river and showed it to everyone, alleviating their doubts. After that day, Wells's stock surged even higher, and all the investors were cheering. However, the story was just beginning. Wells took his girlfriend, Kay, to look at luxury homes and ended up buying one, then celebrated wildly at a bar. While flirting with a blonde woman, Kay saw him and had a big argument with him, leading to their breakup. The next day, during a financing meeting, a large company offered $3 $300 million to buy his mine. Wells exploded with anger, stating that mining for gold was his dream. If someone sold their dreams, what was the point of living? The investment mogul watched him leave, beginning to admire him. After all, in 1964, $300 million was enough for a few lifetimes. Meanwhile, in Indonesia, a group of military officers suddenly arrived to stop Mike and the workers from mining the gold and to deport them. When Wells heard this news, he realized that the financial mogul, frustrated by his failed acquisition, had colluded with the Indonesian military to forcefully take over the mine. Once this information became public, Wells's stock plummeted nearly 50 points. They couldn't compete with the power of capital. This time, it was over for them. Wells, drunk and despondent at the bar, had lost everything and hit rock bottom. However, Mike came to his side and told Wells that when he was looking for copper mines, he was actually trying to find bauxite. The journey was arduous, and he had gotten stuck along the way, only to discover that it was the very site of the copper mine. Wells responded, "You were looking for bauxite and found copper. I was looking for gold, and I found a friend." He smiled, knowing that Mike must have a new plan in mind. The next day, Mike brought Wells to meet the son of the Indonesian president. Danny, the president's son, had always wanted to build his own legacy, but everything he tried ended in failure. If he could make a success of mining gold this time, the president would surely take notice. However, Danny was a suspicious person. He told Wells that if he dared to touch a tiger's head, he would partner with him. In order to successfully mine for gold, Wells had to muster his courage. Under the cover of night, he went to Danny's wildlife park. He entered the cage, and the tiger began to roar. But Wells didn't flinch. He slowly approached the tiger, extending his hand until he finally touched the tiger's head. With his incredible bravery, Wells secured the partnership with the president's son. Danny helped him obtain the necessary permits and signed an agreement with the Indonesian government, with Wells owning 15% and the government holding 85%. News of Wells's partnership with the Indonesian government spread quickly through Wall Street. Wells was back on top and was awarded the prestigious gold medal from the National Mining Association. He was overjoyed. As a member of a mining dynasty, he had finally restored his family's honor and business. While Wells shone on the award stage, Mike quietly left the ceremony. But the story was far from over. The next day, Wells was confronted by angry investors at the company's entrance. Still hungover, he had no idea what was happening. Faced with the crowd of investors and their countless accusations, Wells fell into deep despair. It turned out that Mike, as a geologist, had always known there was no gold there. He had bribed the local testing agency and mixed gold powder into the samples, fabricating the entire event. Mike had already vanished, having cashed out his shares for a total of $164 million. The Indonesian Prince Danny had also converted most of his shares into cash. In other words, the gold mining company, valued at billions, had evaporated overnight, leaving investors drained of their money and investment firms facing losses of over $1 billion. Wells himself not only earned nothing but also became the prime suspect in this massive fraud case. The FBI quickly located Wells and took him in for questioning. As the subject of the investigation, he explained the entire story to the FBI. Just then, another piece of news arrived. Mike had sold his stocks overseas for a total of $164 million. When the truth came to light, Mike was arrested by the local Indonesian military and was to be extradited to a U.S. prison. However, during transport on a military helicopter, Mike jumped out of the aircraft and died. Wells couldn't believe the story. He thought the $164 million would greatly benefit Indonesia and suspected the Indonesian government was involved in the scheme. The FBI agents said they had found Mike's body, but his hands and face had been eaten, likely by wild boars. Still, they confirmed it was indeed Mike. Additionally, Danny in Indonesia had sold off many stocks, making the Suharto family even wealthier. The only question remaining was whether Wells was involved in the fraud. Wells angrily retorted that he had always been focused on revitalizing his family legacy and pursuing his dreams. He didn't care about money. For him, the gold mine represented a dream, not just cash. If he were in it for the money, he would have accepted the $300 million acquisition offer from the financial mogul. He nearly died from malaria while trying to mine for gold and spent his last penny to pursue his dream of touching a tiger. After weeks of being in a coma from malaria, Mike had discovered the gold mine. Wells railed against a society that didn't care about the truth, where everyone was greedy and only interested in money. He laughed at those who were blinded by greed, saying, "If the gold is fake, why not investigate it?" But everyone had already gotten rich. Unbeknownst to him, he was completely unaware of Mike's fraud. Wells insisted that he had sacrificed everything. What mattered to him was not money but the pursuit of gold, his dream. The federal agents turned off the recorder. They had talked for quite a while and were almost certain that Wells was not involved in the fraud. Wells was released, looking up at the sky where two birds were flying. He smiled as he got into a car. Having lost everything, he arrived at his ex-girlfriend Kay's house. Kay smiled as she opened the door and pulled out several letters letters addressed to Wells from the fridge, one of which was from Mike in Indonesia. Wells opened the letter to find the napkin that contained their 50-50 agreement. Beneath the napkin was a check for $82 million, exactly half of the $164 million. Wells smiled. Subscribe our channel for more. In the next episode, we will bring you another movie recap about money.